Welcome to week 2 of Python Review. We're going to be looking at conditionals this week, primarily if statements, and then a few different types of loops. And in this video, we're going to focus on if statements and how to put conditions together, and just remember the basic syntax of how to do that. We're going to pick up with the examples from last week where we were rolling dice and kind of playing early prototype video games. So let's start by getting that syntax in there, and then we'll add in the conditions. So remember, we want to import random, which gives us the ability to randomly generate numbers. And remember, we could roll a die, and we would set that equal to random.randint 1, 6, which says to generate a random integer between 1 and 6, and we're going to store that in the variable die1. And then just to make sure that this is working, we're going to print die1. I just want to reiterate something I had said last time, that this is a really productive way to write programs, that we write one line and then we print something, make sure it's working, and we don't go on to write anything else until we're sure that that's okay. So I already have this file called condition1.py, and I'm going to switch over and run that. And it prints out a 1. If I run it again, seems to be working great. Okay. So now we're able to roll a die, and let's say that we want to do this where we basically have two players, player 1 and player 2. We'll roll a die for each one, and whoever's die is bigger wins. So let's change die1 to P1 die. That's going to be player 1's die. And then we'll print here player 1, and then concatenate the value. Now I've used the str here because if you remember, we'll get an error if we try to do a string and then just p1 die, which is an integer. Python will get confused. So we need to say you're going to print this string and then concatenate onto that the string version of the value of this integer. We're going to do that for player 2, but we've made a few changes, so let's just again flip over and make sure that that works. And that looks fine. Okay, so we're going to do that for player 1, and then we'll do the same thing for player 2. And I'll just update all of these. Okay, so now we've rolled one die for player 1, we've rolled another one for player 2. We'll have printed out the value of both of those, and now we want to print out who's the winner, whoever has the bigger value. So to do that, we're going to introduce a conditional statement. So we're going to say if P1 die is greater than P2 die, and then our syntax is to put a colon at the end, and then indent print player 1 wins. Now we're going to want to do more beyond this, but again, I want to stop here and just test this to make sure that it's going to work. Okay, and we have an error here, and that's because I forgot the parentheses. You can see that it's pointing out that it's missing the parentheses. I forgot to put those around there. So let's fix that. Okay, and now it doesn't print out the player 1 wins because player 1 actually lost here. Player 1 lost again, and here we did get a case where player 1 wins, so that's working. This is why it's good to run your program every time. This is a little mistake that I just overlooked, but if I had written a whole bunch of code and maybe introduced 1 or 2 other errors, then it becomes really difficult to track down where the problem is. So, okay, so now if player 1 has a bigger die, that's going to work. We also want to print out something if player 2 is winning. And then we also have to consider the case where they roll the same number. So there's actually 3 conditions to look at here. If player 1's number is bigger, if player 2 number is bigger, or the same. So let's do it the wrong way first, just to see the simple version of the syntax, and then we'll fix it. So we can say if player 1 has the bigger number, we print that they win. Then we can say else print player 2 wins. Now, player 2 will also win here if they roll the same number. Player 1 only wins if theirs is bigger. Player 2 wins if player 2's number is bigger or if they're the same. We will come back and fix that, so player 2 will only win if player 2's roll is larger. But for now, we'll do this, and that's just so we get used to seeing this else syntax. The if syntax says basically you'll do everything that comes in underneath it if the condition is true. And then if that condition is false, you do whatever comes with the else. Without that, you just do nothing, and that's what we saw when we ran this before, that when player 1 had a lower number, didn't do anything, and that's fine. That else says, okay, if player one doesn't have the bigger number, then you're going to do all of this. So now we should always get a printout about who wins. So let's run this again. And so here we can see player two wins. Player two wins again. Player two seems to be having a good day in our program, but player one does win. Now, it probably will take a lot of rolls before we would get to the point where they actually roll the same number, but we want to allow for that in here. So there's a few ways that we can do that in the program. We could say, if player one's number is bigger, we'll print that player two wins. Otherwise, with that else, we could check, don't type this because we're not going to do it this way, but it would be fine if you wanted to do then, we'll say if player two is bigger than player one, then we'll print player two wins. Otherwise, we'll print tie. This is a fine way to do it, though it gets a little bit messy. We have three conditions, but we kind of have it written as a condition, an else, and then another condition with an else. So there's sort of four things to keep track of. And you can imagine if you have 8 conditions, doing it like this, you end up with a lot of nesting and everything sort of shifting over to the right. It gets a little bit messy. But it's not uncommon that you have a bunch of conditions like this that you want to check. So this way would work totally fine, but we're going to look at a different approach. So I'm going to comment that out. And I'll actually comment this line out as well. And instead we're going to use the syntax elif, which is a combination of else if. So it means otherwise, if this next condition is true, do this. So it's a way to combine the else and the if together. So we'll say elif, the P2 die is greater than the P1 die. Then we'll print player 2 wins. And then we can end with an else. Print the tie. Now with this structure, you can put a whole bunch of elifs. So it doesn't work in this example, but we could put another condition here, and then do something, and then we could have another elif, and then do something else, and then end with an else. The important thing with this structure is that you start with an if, and then you have as many elifs as you want. There's only one else, and that would come at the end. The else is what's done if none of the other conditions were true. So in this case, if player 1 is bigger, we say that they win. If player 2 is bigger, we say that they win. Otherwise, we print that there's a tie. Instead of the else, we could say elif P1 die equals the P2 die. And remember, if we're checking equality, we use 2 equal signs. This would also be fine, and then we wouldn't need an else because we've checked every single condition here. So this is equivalent to just having an else. We've just kind of spelled out what it means. In any case, this now should allow us to have our program that will work for all the cases. Okay, and so we got a couple ties finally for the first time. So we got player 1 winning on the first time, we have 2 ties, and then player 2 winning. And so now we have a not very exciting video game, but a little dice game that has 2 people playing, and we can tell who's the winner. Now, I want us to actually work towards building some little text-based video games. And so we're going to make this a little bit more interactive. We're still just rolling dice, and so there's not a lot that people can do. But right now we just run the program and it does everything for us. Instead of just doing that, what we can do is make it a little more interactive. And this has nothing to do with conditions. It's just making our program a little nicer. So what we're going to do before the die is rolled is we're going to ask for input. And we'll say player 1, hit enter to roll. Now, we're not using anything from this. It basically is just letting the user feel like they're having some control over running the program. And then we roll the die, and then let's just change this to say player 1 rolled, and then whatever it was. We'll then copy this line and do the same thing. Player 2, hit enter to roll, and change that. And then we'll leave the winner and loser the same. So we're doing input here. We're not even recording what they type because we don't care. It's just basically pausing the program and requiring the user to hit enter. So we feel like we have a sort of interactive game. We'll eventually use this and start asking the user for input for some more sophisticated games where they're doing things. So let's save that and take a look at that working. So player 1 hit enter to roll, and it's going to wait. I hit enter, and then it says player 1 rolled a 3. Player 2 hit enter to roll. I hit enter, and player 2 rolled a 5, and we get the winner. So now it feels like a slightly interactive program. But the main thing that I want you to pay attention to here, coding-wise, is just reminding yourself of this syntax of how to do conditions. Let's take a look at one more example where we're going to do the same thing with dice, but we're going to take some player input. I'm going to copy these first 3 lines, and then we'll open ourselves a new file. Okay, so I'm going to paste in those lines that we had. We're going to import random, and then we're going to ask the player for input. But instead of asking them just to hit enter to roll, what we're going to do in this program is allow them to pick how many sides their die will have, and then they'll be able to roll that die a bunch of times. So first we want to figure out how many sides. So instead of just asking them to hit enter, we're going to say the number of sides will be our variable, and we'll say how many sides should the die have. Let me stretch that out so we can see it all. Now that's going to get stored in sides. But remember when we ask for input that it gets stored as a string. So we're going to want to turn that into an integer. Again, let me stretch this here so we can see the whole thing. So sides is going to be the integer value of the input. How many sides should the die have? Then when we go to roll the die, instead of doing a random number between 1 and 6, we'll do a random number between 1 and sides. And then let's print you rolled. And then we have to turn our number here back into a string in order to print it. So we've got a little program here that I can say I want a 15-sided die, and it will generate a random number between 1 and 15 and print that out for us. So let's save that as sides.py. Go ahead and try to roll it. So I'll say 15, and I get an 8. If I roll again, it gets a 15. So good, that's working. But the problem here is that basically every time I want to roll the die, I have to rerun the program and retype in how many sides it should have. Ideally, I would just be able to roll a bunch of times. So we can do that here, and we're going to do this in a few stacked ways. Right now we're just rolling it, and we could say input, hit enter to roll again. And then we'll repeat the same thing. And now we have a block of code, and so if we want the person to be able to roll 5 times, we could just repeat that several times, and that'll work for us. So we can say I want a 15-sided die, and I can just keep hitting enter and get my output. But again, I'm only entering a fixed number of times. The program has that chunk of code copied, I guess, 3 times, so there's 4 rolls altogether, and that's it. What we want to be able to do is allow the person to continue rolling as many times as they want, and to do that, we're going to have to use loops. We're going to cover loops in the next video, so we're going to put that on hold, and we're going to pick that example up with the next one. But what I want us to take one more look at is using input and then combining that with the conditions in order to see some output. So let's start one more new program. So here we're just going to do a simple age checker, and this is just to give us one more example to play with for using conditions and user input. So we're going to ask people for their age. We'll create a variable called age, and we'll set that equal to the integer version of the input, and we'll ask, what is your age? And then basically we're going to check to see if their age is 21 or over. If it is, we'll print a welcome message. If it's not, we'll tell them to go away. Really simple example just to get you again playing with conditions. We'll say if age is greater than or equal to 21, then we'll print welcome. Else we'll print go away. So we're taking input from what is your age, storing that in the variable age, and then we're going to use that in our conditions here. So we have a simple little script, but just combining these ideas of using input stored in variables inside these conditions. So let's save that, flip over here. And if I say my age is 22, I get a welcome. If I say my age is 11, I get a go away message. So we have a simple script here combining user input and conditions. The next video is going to look at loops and doing some more sophisticated things, but hopefully this gets you a beginning reminder of how we work with conditions in Python.